Charles had always been a trusting husband. After 23 years of marriage to Camilla, he thought he knew everything about her. She was organized, practical, and loved gardening. Their house in the countryside was her pride and joy, with every room perfectly arranged and decorated with her personal touch. But lately, something felt different. It started 3 months ago when Charles noticed Camilla disappearing for hours at a time. When he asked where she had been, she would give vague answers like, "Just tidying up," or "working on a project." She seemed nervous, almost jumpy, whenever he came home unexpectedly. Charles worked as an accountant in town, usually leaving early in the morning and returning by 6 in the evening. His routine was predictable, which Camilla seemed to appreciate. But recently, she had been asking detailed questions about his schedule, wanting to know exactly when he would be home. "Why do you need to know?" Charles had asked one Tuesday evening over dinner. Camilla stirred her soup without looking up. "Just planning my day better. You know how I like everything organized." Charles accepted this explanation, but doubt crept into his mind. Camilla had never been secretive before. They shared everything with each other, from small daily annoyances to big life decisions. This new behavior was completely out of character. The strange incidents continued to pile up. Charles found unfamiliar keys in Camilla's purse when looking for breath mints. When he asked about them, she quickly took the purse away and said they were old keys she forgot to throw out. But Charles had never seen those keys before, and they looked new. Then there were the phone calls. Camilla would step outside to answer her phone, claiming it was just her sister Margaret. But when Charles called Margaret to invite her for Sunday dinner, Margaret mentioned she hadn't spoken to Camilla in weeks. One Saturday morning, Charles decided to surprise Camilla with breakfast in bed. He woke up early and went to the kitchen, but she wasn't in their bedroom when he returned with the tray. He searched the house and found her coming in through the back door, slightly out of breath. "I was just getting some fresh herbs from the garden," she explained, but Charles noticed she wasn't carrying any herbs. Her clothes were dusty, and there were cobwebs in her hair. The most puzzling discovery came when Charles was looking for his old photo albums in the attic. He wanted to show their neighbor some pictures from their honeymoon. While moving boxes around, he noticed that several had been recently moved. The dust patterns on the floor showed that someone had been up there regularly, creating clear paths between certain boxes. Camilla rarely went to the attic. She claimed it was too dusty and cramped for her liking. Yet, someone had obviously been spending time up there. And Charles was certain it wasn't him. That evening, he casually mentioned his trip to the attic. "I was looking for our honeymoon photos today. Someone's been moving things around up there." Camilla's face went pale. "Oh, that was me. I've been trying to organize our old things. You know how cluttered it gets." But Charles knew this was a lie. The boxes that had been moved contained his old work files and tax documents. Nothing that would interest Camilla. Besides, if she had been organizing, she would have mentioned it. Camilla loved talking about her cleaning and organizing projects. Sleep became difficult for Charles. He would lie awake at night, listening to every sound in the house. Sometimes he thought he heard footsteps. But when he got up to check, Camilla would be sleeping peacefully beside him. He began to wonder if stress from work was making him paranoid. But then came the night that changed everything. Charles had been feeling unwell all day with a headache and decided to leave work early. He usually called Camilla to let her know when his schedule changed, but his phone battery had died. He drove home, looking forward to a quiet afternoon and maybe some of Camilla's homemade soup. The house seemed empty when he arrived. Camilla's car was in the driveway, so she had to be somewhere nearby. Charles called her name but got no response. He checked the garden, the basement, and even the garage. She was nowhere to be found. As he stood in their living room, puzzled by her absence, Charles heard a sound. It was faint but distinct, like something heavy being moved across the floor. The sound was coming from above. From the attic, Charles climbed the stairs quietly, his heart beating faster with each step. The attic door was slightly open, and he could see a dim light glowing inside. He had never installed any lighting in the attic besides one bare bulb near the entrance. This light was different, softer, coming from deeper inside the storage space. He pushed the door open wider and stepped inside. The familiar musty smell of old boxes and stored furniture filled his nose. But something else was different. The air felt warmer, and there was a faint scent of lavender, Camilla's favorite perfume. Following the light, Charles made his way carefully between the stored items. As he moved deeper into the attic, the space opened up more than he remembered. Had there always been this much room back here? He couldn't recall ever exploring this far into the attic space. The light was coming from around a corner, behind a large wardrobe that had belonged to Camilla's grandmother. Charles had helped move that wardrobe up here years ago, and he remembered it being pushed against the far wall. Now there was clearly space behind it. As Charles edged around the wardrobe, his breath caught in his throat. There, in a space he never knew existed, was a room. An actual room, complete with walls, a door, and windows he had never seen from outside the house. The door was slightly open, and warm light spilled out into the attic space. Charles could hear movement inside, and the sound of Camilla's voice. Though he couldn't make out what she was saying, his hands trembling, Charles approached the door. Part of him wanted to call out, to announce his presence, and ask for an explanation. But a larger part of him needed to understand what was happening before confronting his wife. He pressed his eye to the crack in the door and peered inside. What Charles saw in that moment would haunt him for the rest of his life. The room was beautifully decorated. Nothing like the dusty attic storage he expected. There were comfortable chairs, soft lighting, and walls covered with photographs. But these weren't family photos or pictures from their marriage. Every single photograph showed the same man, a man Charles had never seen before. There were pictures of this stranger alone, pictures of him with Camilla, and pictures of what appeared to be a much younger Camilla with this same man. Some photos looked recent, others seemed to be from many years ago. In the center of the room sat Camilla, holding what appeared to be a letter. She was crying softly, speaking to a framed photograph on the small table beside her. "I miss you so much, David," she whispered. "Charles is a good man. But he's not you. He'll never be you." Dawn. Charles felt the blood drain from his face. Who was David? Why had Camilla created this secret shrine to another man? How long had this room existed in his own house, without his knowledge? As these questions raced through his mind, Charles accidentally shifted his weight, causing a floorboard to creak. The sound echoed in the quiet attic space. Camilla's head snapped up, and she looked directly at the door. For a moment, their eyes met through the crack, and Charles saw something he had never seen in his wife's face before. Pure terror. "Charles?" Camilla's voice was barely a whisper. Charles stepped back from the door, his mind reeling. 23 years of marriage, and his wife had been keeping a secret room dedicated to another man. How was this possible? How had he never noticed the construction? When had she built this room, and why? The door opened fully, and Camilla stood in the doorway. Her face was tear-stained, and she clutched the letter to her chest like a shield. "I can explain," she said, but her voice was shaking so badly Charles could barely understand her. Charles stared at his wife, this woman he thought he knew completely, standing in a room that shouldn't exist, surrounded by photos of a man whose name he had never heard. "Who is David?" Charles asked, surprised by how calm his own voice sounded. Camilla's legs seemed to give out, and she sank back into the chair. The letter fell from her hands to the floor, and Charles could see it was written in handwriting he didn't recognize. "He was my first husband," Camilla whispered. Charles felt like the ground had disappeared beneath his feet. First husband? In 23 years of marriage, Camilla had never mentioned being married before. They had shared their entire life stories during their courtship. Or so he thought. "First husband?" Charles repeated, his voice barely above a whisper. Camilla nodded, unable to meet his eyes. She picked up the fallen letter with shaking hands, folding it carefully as if it were made of precious silk. "I should have told you. I wanted to tell you so many times, but I just couldn't find the words." Charles stepped into the mysterious room, looking around in amazement. The space was larger than their master bedroom, with slanted walls that followed the roofline. How had this room been here all these years without him knowing? The construction looked professional, not like something that could be done secretly. Camilla, how long has this room existed? She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. It was already here when we bought the house. The previous owner mentioned there was extra storage space in the attic. But I don't think you were paying attention during that conversation. You were more interested in the basement workshop. Charles tried to remember the day they toured this house 23 years ago. He did recall being excited about the basement space for his woodworking hobby, but surely he would have noticed an entire room in the attic? You've been coming up here for 3 months, Charles said, piecing together the timeline of Camilla's strange behavior. Actually, I've been coming here for 23 years, Camilla admitted. Ever since we moved in. But recently, I've been spending more time here because… She gestured to a small desk in the corner that Charles hadn't noticed before. Because I've been writing to him. On the desk, Charles could see neat stacks of paper, pens, and what appeared to be unsent letters. Some were in envelopes, others were folded but not sealed. Writing to him, Camilla, is David alive? The question hung in the air between them. Camilla looked up at Charles with eyes so full of pain that he almost wished he hadn't asked. No. David died in a car accident 6 months after we got married. We were both 22. Charles sat down heavily in the other chair, trying to process this information. His wife had been married before, to someone who died tragically young, and she had never told him. Not only that, but she had been secretly mourning this man their entire marriage. Why didn't you tell me? Charles asked. Did you think I wouldn't understand? Camilla stood up and walked to the wall of photographs. She touched one gently. A wedding photo of her and David. Charles could see how young she looked, how different. Her smile in that photo was radiant in a way that made Charles realize he had never seen her look quite that happy. When I met you, I was 31 years old. I had spent 9 years grieving David, going to therapy, trying to build a new life. I thought I was ready to love someone new. She turned back to Charles, and he could see the struggle in her face as she tried to find the right words. You were so kind, so patient with me. You never pushed me to talk about my past, and I was grateful for that. But I also took advantage of your kindness. Every time I thought about telling you about David, I would convince myself it wasn't necessary. He was gone, you were here, and I was building something new with you. Charles looked around the room again. There were dozens of photos, some clearly recent printouts from digital files, others old and faded. In many of the newer photos, David looked exactly the same as in the old ones. These recent pictures, how is that possible? Camilla followed his gaze. I've been collecting photos from his family and friends over the years. His sister Margaret sends me pictures sometimes. She and I stayed in touch after he died. Unrelavin. Margaret? Your sister Margaret, who you're always talking to on the phone? No, that's David's sister. My sister is named Helen. I've been lying about the phone calls, Charles. Margaret calls me when she finds old photos of David, or when she wants to talk about memories. She's the only person who understands how much I still miss him. Each revelation hit Charles like a physical blow. Not only had Camilla hidden her first marriage, but she had also been lying about phone calls and maintaining a relationship with her dead husband's family without ever mentioning it. What about the letters you've been writing? Camilla walked back to the desk and picked up one of the sealed envelopes. I write to him when I'm struggling, when I feel guilty about being happy with you, or when I feel guilty about still missing him. It helps me organize my thoughts. What kind of things do you write about? Everything. Our daily life, changes in the neighborhood, holidays we celebrate. I tell him about you. About how you make me laugh. About how safe you make me feel. She paused, looking down at the letter in her hands. I also tell him how sorry I am that I couldn't save him, and how much I wish he could have met you. Charles felt a complex mix of emotions. He was hurt by the secrecy, confused by the situation, but also strangely touched that Camilla had been talking to David about him all these years. Do you love him more than me? The question escaped before Charles could stop himself. It was the fear that had been growing in his heart since the moment he saw Camilla's tears as she spoke to David's photograph. Camilla was quiet for a long moment. When she finally spoke, her voice was steady but sad. I love you differently than I love David. David and I were children when we fell in love. Everything was new and exciting, and felt like it would last forever. We didn't have time to face real challenges together before he died. She moved closer to Charles, kneeling beside his chair. You and I have built a real life together. We've faced problems and solved them. We've supported each other through difficult times. We've grown up together in ways David and I never had the chance to do. But you still love him. Yes, I still love him. But Charles, loving him doesn't mean I love you less. They're completely different kinds of love. Charles tried to understand this concept, but it felt impossible. How could someone love two people at the same time, even if one was dead? All these years, when we've been intimate, when we've celebrated anniversaries, when I thought you were completely present with me. Were you thinking about him? Camilla's face crumpled. Sometimes. Not always. But sometimes. Especially on difficult days. Or on dates that were significant in my relationship with David. I know that's hurtful to hear, but you asked for honesty. Charles stood up and walked around the room, looking more closely at the photographs. In some of them, David was wearing a uniform. Was he in the military? He was a firefighter. He was driving home from a night shift when a drunk driver hit his car. He died instantly. Charles could hear the practiced way Camilla recited these facts, as if she had told this story many times before. How many other people knew about David while Charles had been kept in the dark? Who else knows about this? About David? About this room? David's family knows we stayed in touch. My therapist knows. Dr. Morrison. The one I see every few months for my checkups. Another lie. Charles had always believed Camilla's regular doctor visits were routine physical exams. She had actually been seeing a therapist to help her process her grief about her first husband. Anyone else? Sarah from the flower shop knows. She's the one who helps me get the specific flowers for David's grave. You visit his grave? Every month on the anniversary of his death. The 20th of every month. I told you I was visiting my cousin in the city. Ari. I was. Charles counted back through the months. Camilla had indeed been taking monthly day trips to the city, always on approximately the same date. He had never questioned these visits because she always came back with small gifts or treats from shops he recognized. The gifts you bring back from these trips. I do stop at shops in the city, but I go there primarily to spend time at David's grave. I bring him flowers. I sit with him. I update him on what's happening in my life. Charles felt overwhelmed by the scope of Camilla's secret life. This wasn't just about hiding a previous marriage. She had maintained an entire relationship with a dead man, complete with regular visits, correspondence with his family, ongoing therapy, and now this shrine-like room. Camilla, are you happy with me? With our marriage? She looked up at him with surprise. Of course I'm happy with you. Charles, you're a wonderful husband. You're kind, reliable, and you make me feel loved every day. But not the way David made you feel loved. No, not the same way. But that doesn't mean it's less valuable or less real. Charles sat back down, rubbing his temples. A headache was building behind his eyes, adding to the emotional pain he was experiencing. I need to understand something. If David hadn't died, would you have stayed married to him forever? I believe so, yes. We were very much in love. So you only married me because David wasn't available anymore. Camilla recoiled as if he had slapped her. That's not fair, Charles. David has been gone for 31 years. I didn't marry you as a replacement for him. I married you because I fell in love with you. But you fell in love with me while still being in love with him. Yes. The simple honesty of that answer hit Charles harder than any elaborate explanation would have. At least she wasn't trying to minimize or deny the situation anymore. What do you want from me now, Camilla? Do you want me to pretend this room doesn't exist? Do you want me to be okay with sharing you with a ghost? I want you to understand that my love for David doesn't take anything away from my love for you. I want you to know that every day, I choose to build a life with you, not with memories of him. But you do build a life with memories of him. This whole room is proof of that. Camilla looked around the space with fresh eyes, as if seeing it through Charles's perspective for the first time. You're right. This room represents the part of my life that I've kept separate from you. I thought I was protecting you from my grief, but I was actually protecting myself from having to fully commit to our relationship. This admission seemed to surprise Camilla as much as it surprised Charles. She had clearly never thought about her secret room in those terms before. "So what happens now?" Charles asked. Before Camilla could answer, they both heard the sound of a car door slamming in their driveway. Charles looked at his watch and realized it was past 6 o'clock. Someone was visiting. And they were both hidden away in a secret room in the attic, surrounded by photos of Camilla's dead first husband. "We should go downstairs," Camilla said quietly. As they prepared to leave the room, Charles took one last look around. Despite everything he had learned, he found himself curious about David. What kind of man had inspired such lasting devotion? What would their lives have been like if David had survived? But as they descended the attic stairs together, Charles realized that those questions were less important than the one that would determine their future. Was there room in Camilla's heart for both her past and her present? And could Charles live with sharing that space? The visitor turned out to be their neighbor, Mrs. Henderson, who had come to borrow some sugar. Charles and Camilla managed to act normally during the brief conversation, but as soon as Mrs. Henderson left, the weight of their unfinished discussion settled back over them. They sat at their kitchen table, the same place where they had shared thousands of meals over the years. Now it felt like they were strangers meeting for the first time. "I need some time to think," Charles said finally. Camilla nodded, though he could see fear in her eyes. "How much time?" "I don't know. This changes everything I thought I knew about our marriage, about you, about us." Over the next several days, Charles found himself unable to focus on anything. At work, he stared at spreadsheets without seeing numbers. At home, he caught himself studying Camilla's face, wondering what she was really thinking about. The house felt different now that Charles knew about the secret room. Every time Camilla went upstairs, he wondered if she was visiting David. When she was quiet during dinner, he questioned whether she was mentally writing letters to her dead husband. On Thursday evening, Charles made a decision. While Camilla was taking a bath, he climbed back up to the attic and entered David's room. In the daylight streaming through windows he had never noticed from outside, the room looked even more elaborate. Charles examined the photographs more carefully, reading the dates written on the backs of some of them. The most recent photo was dated just 2 months ago, a picture of David's grave decorated with fresh flowers. Charles picked up one of the unsealed letters from Camilla's desk. He knew he shouldn't read it, but his curiosity was stronger than his sense of privacy. The letter was dated from the previous week, just days before Charles had discovered the room. "Dear David," it began. "Charles has been asking more questions about my schedule lately. I think he's starting to notice how much time I spend up here with you. Part of me wants him to find out about you, because carrying this secret has become so exhausting. But I'm terrified of hurting him." Charles continued reading, his hands shaking slightly. "I know you would like Charles. He has your same gentle nature, your same way of making me feel safe. But he's also different from you in ways that I've grown to love. Where you were spontaneous and adventurous, Charles is steady and thoughtful. Where you made me feel like I was flying, Charles makes me feel like I'm home." The letter went on to describe Charles's recent attempt to surprise Camilla with breakfast in bed and how touched she had been by the gesture. "I wish I could love Charles with the same uncomplicated joy I felt with you. But losing you taught me that love can disappear in an instant. And I think that fear has kept me from giving Charles everything I could give him. He deserves better than a wife who holds part of herself in reserve." Charles set the letter down, his emotions in turmoil. Reading Camilla's private thoughts had given him insight into her perspective, but it had also raised new questions. Did he want a wife who had to work so hard to love him fully? That evening, Charles decided to be direct. "I read one of your letters to David." Camilla looked up from her book, alarm crossing her face. "Which one?" "The one from last week, where you talked about me." "Charles, those letters are private. They're how I process my feelings." "I know. And I'm sorry for violating your privacy. But I needed to understand how you really see our marriage." Camilla closed her book and set it aside. "What did you think about what you read? I think you're right that you've been holding part of yourself back from our relationship. But I also think you've been unfair to both of us by making that choice without involving me. What do you mean? Charles had spent hours thinking about this conversation. You decided on your own that I couldn't handle knowing about David. You decided on your own that keeping him secret was better for our marriage. But you never gave me the chance to prove that I could love you even with your complicated past. Camilla was quiet for a long moment. You're right. I was protecting myself more than I was protecting you. Here's what I need to know, Camilla. If we're going to move forward, I need complete honesty. No more secrets, no more lies about where you're going or who you're talking to. I can do that. And I need to understand what David means to you now, in your current life. Not what he meant to you 30 years ago, but what he means to you today. Camilla thought carefully before answering. David represents the person I was before I learned that life could be cruel and unpredictable. When I think about him, I remember what it felt like to love someone without fear. And what do I represent? You represent the life I chose to build after I learned those hard lessons. You represent stability and partnership, and the quiet kind of love that grows stronger over time instead of burning out. Charles considered this. Do you think it's possible for you to love me without fear? Or will David always represent something I can't give you? I don't know, Camilla admitted. I've been afraid for so long that I'm not sure what it would feel like to love without fear. Are you willing to try? Yes. But Charles, I need you to understand that letting go of David feels like losing him all over again. I know that might not make sense to you. But this room, these letters, these visits to his grave, they've been my way of keeping him alive. Charles walked to the window and looked out at their garden. Camilla had planted roses along the fence line, and they were blooming beautifully in the evening light. What if we found a different way to honor David's memory? A way that included me instead of excluding me. What do you mean? Charles turned back to his wife. What if we visited his grave together? What if you told me stories about him instead of writing letters? What if David became part of our life together instead of a secret you keep from me? Camilla's eyes filled with tears. You would do that? You would help me remember him? Camilla, I've been competing with David for 23 years without even knowing it. Maybe it's time I stopped competing and started understanding. Over the following weeks, Charles and Camilla began a new phase of their marriage. Camilla told Charles stories about David. How they met. What he was like. How he died. Charles found that learning about David made him feel closer to Camilla. Not more distant from her. They visited David's grave together on the 20th of the month. Charles brought flowers and stood quietly while Camilla talked to David about their life. It felt strange at first, but Charles gradually understood that this ritual brought Camilla peace. Tell him about the new garden bed we planted, Charles suggested during one visit. Camilla looked surprised. You want me to include you in what I tell him? David was part of your life, and now you're part of mine. It makes sense that he should know about me too. The secret room in the attic became a place they visited together. Charles helped Camilla organize the photographs and create a proper memorial space. He even contributed some pictures, photos of Camilla from their early dating years that showed how happy she had become again. David should see that you found joy after losing him, Charles explained. The change in their marriage was gradual but profound. Camilla stopped disappearing for hours at a time because she no longer needed to hide her grief. Charles stopped feeling suspicious and jealous because he finally understood what he had been sensing all these years. 3 months after discovering the secret room, Charles came home to find Camilla in the kitchen, cooking his favorite meal. What's the occasion? He asked. I wanted to thank you. For what? For loving me enough to let me love David too. For understanding that my heart is big enough for both of you. Even though that love looks different. Charles wrapped his arms around his wife from behind as she stirred the sauce on the stove. I need to tell you something, he said. Camilla tensed slightly. After months of revelations, she had learned to be cautious about unexpected announcements. I've been thinking about what you wrote in that letter. About being afraid to love me fully because love can disappear in an instant. Yes? I realized that I've been doing the same thing. I've been holding back from loving you completely. Because I sensed you weren't completely present with me. I was protecting myself from rejection. Camilla turned in his arms to face him. And now I understand that love isn't diminished by sharing it. Your love for David doesn't make your love for me less real or less valuable. It just makes you someone who has a greater capacity for love than most people. Do you really believe that? Charles looked into his wife's eyes, seeing both the young woman who had loved David with fearless joy and the mature woman who had chosen to build a life with him. I really believe that. And I think David would be happy to know that you didn't let losing him stop you from loving again. That night, as they lay in bed together, Camilla spoke into the darkness. Charles, yes, I love you. Not because David isn't here. Not as a replacement for what I lost. But because you're you. Because you showed me that it's possible to love someone completely, even when you're afraid of losing them. Charles pulled his wife closer, feeling truly peaceful for the first time since discovering her secret. I love you too, Camilla. All of you, including the parts that still belong to David. The secret room still exists in their attic. But it's no longer a secret. Friends and family who visit their home sometimes ask about it, and Camilla tells them about David without shame or fear. The room has become a testament to love's ability to transcend death and enhance life. Charles learned that trust isn't just about honesty in the present moment. It's about being willing to embrace your partner's entire story. Even the chapters that were written before you met them. Camilla learned that love doesn't have to be rationed or divided. The heart's capacity for love grows when it's exercised, not when it's protected. Their marriage didn't just survive Camilla's secret, it became stronger, deeper, and more authentic than either of them had thought possible. They learned that the foundation of a lasting relationship isn't the absence of other loves, but the presence of complete acceptance. Sometimes Charles still feels a pang of sadness when Camilla speaks about David with particular tenderness, but he's learned to see that sadness as a small price to pay for being married to someone whose capacity for love is so profound that it can encompass both the living and the dead, both the past and the present, both safety and adventure. On their 25th wedding anniversary, Charles surprised Camilla with a gift. A professional photograph of all three of them. He had taken a picture of himself and Camilla, and had it artistically combined with one of the photos of David from the attic room. I wanted David to be included in this milestone, Charles explained, as Camilla stared at the image through tears. He would have loved you, Camilla whispered. I know, Charles replied, and I would have loved him too. The photograph now sits on their mantel, next to pictures of their wedding day and family gatherings. Visitors sometimes ask about it, giving Charles and Camilla opportunities to share their story of how love multiplied rather than divided, how secrets almost destroyed them but truth ultimately set them free. Their love story didn't follow a conventional path, but it arrived at a destination more beautiful than either of them could have imagined when they first said their wedding vows 23 years ago. They learned that the strongest marriages aren't built on the foundation of being each other's first love, but on being each other's most complete love. Charles discovered that trust isn't broken by the existence of secrets, but by the unwillingness to share them. Camilla discovered that honoring the past doesn't require hiding from the present. Together, they discovered that some love stories have room for more than two people, and that the heart's capacity for love is limited only by fear.